In 2024, Tom Selleck finished 14 seasons as Frank Reagan on Blue Bloods. For more than a decade, he had been the steady center of one of the most dependable dramas on American television. Then the show ended. The franchise moved on, and Tom Selleck returned to the quiet place he had been protecting for more than 30 years. A 60-acre ranch in California. A wife who knew him before the last chapter. A daughter raised far from the Hollywood machine. And a private life he once admitted he needed because fame had left him without a three-dimensional one. Most people know what Tom Selleck lost. James Bond went to someone else. Indiana Jones went to someone else. Magnum P.I. made him famous, then exhausted him. Blue Bloods gave him 14 seasons, then left him facing a future no network could promise. But the saddest part of Tom Selleck's story may not be what Hollywood took from him. It may be what he spent his whole life trying to keep Hollywood from taking. His marriage, his daughter, his body, his silence, his land, and the ordinary dignity of being a man when the cameras stop rolling. Stay with us, because Tom Selleck's life away from Hollywood may reveal more than any role he ever played. Detroit, Michigan, January 29, 1945. The war in Europe still had months left to run. America was living between exhaustion and hope, between sacrifice and return, between the men who had not yet come home and the families already imagining what peace might look like. Into that world came Thomas William Selleck. He was not born into Hollywood. There were no studio gates waiting for him. No famous last name. No family dynasty. No early promise that one day millions of people would know his face. His father, Robert Dean Selleck, worked in real estate. He was serious, practical, and exacting, a man who believed work was the honest measure of a life. His mother, Martha Jagger Selleck, brought warmth into the home, but the house still carried the grammar of discipline. Effort mattered. Excuses did not. The family moved west when Tom was young, settling in California, in the San Fernando Valley. It was a California of post-war expansion. New streets, new houses, cut grass, sun on sidewalks. Families trying to build futures from the discipline of ordinary work. Tom was the tall one. He was always the tall one. By the time he reached high school, his body made him visible before he ever said a word. Coaches noticed him. Classmates noticed him. Strangers noticed him. Height gives a young man presence, but also removes the comfort of disappearing. He played baseball. He played basketball. And basketball became more than a sport. It became a shape for future, not a vague childhood dream. A real one, a court, a scholarship, a path, a way to prove that the body other people noticed could actually carry him somewhere. He was recruited by the University of Southern California on a basketball scholarship. That meant something. It meant he had been good enough to be chosen. Good enough to arrive on campus believing the next door might open if he worked hard enough. But the first door of Tom Selleck's life closed quietly. No scandal. No injury. No dramatic betrayal. Just numbers. 7 games. For points. 7 games for the USC Trojans. 4 points total. 4 points for a young man who had once imagined basketball as a future. 4 points across 7 appearances in a program where high school excellence suddenly looked small. The coaches were not cruel. The school was not cruel. The truth was worse because it was simple. At that level, being good was not enough. He scored 4 points. Then he stopped playing. That moment is easy to pass over in a biography. It should not be, because it tells you something about the man before the mustache, before the Ferrari, before the police commissioner's desk, before the ranch. Tom Selleck learned early that the thing you want most can end without a dramatic explanation. A door can close without hating you. A dream can die without making a sound. And when it does, a man has to decide what kind of person he becomes after the silence. Tom did not turn that failure into a lifelong grievance. He did not become the former athlete who blamed the coach, the system, the timing, or the world. He put the dream down. Then he looked for the next true thing. That pattern would follow him for the next 60 years. A role would vanish. He would go back to work. A franchise would choose another man. He would go back to work. A marriage would break. He would go back to work. A show would end. He would go back to the ranch. Loss came. He moved. The next true thing arrived almost sideways. A modeling class. A suggestion. Someone noticed how he stood in a room. How he moved. How his face seemed to hold something even when he was not performing. He began studying acting with the seriousness he had once taken to the basketball court. But Hollywood does not reward seriousness quickly. The years before fame were long. Commercials, small television parts, auditions that went nowhere, callbacks that did not come, waiting rooms, cheap hope, the steady humiliation of being almost remembered. The strange thing about those years is that they do not leave many photographs. Fame has pictures. Waiting usually does not. Waiting is a hallway outside a casting room. It is a clean shirt worn one more time because today may matter. It is the smell of coffee in the studio office, the sound of another actor's name being called, the little nod from someone behind a desk who has already moved on before you reach the parking lot. Tom Selleck was not invisible in the obvious way. That may have made it harder. People noticed him. They noticed the height, the face, the voice, the presence. But being noticed is not the same as being chosen. For years, he lived in that narrow space between recognition and arrival, close enough to imagine a career, not close enough to have one. That kind of waiting can wear a man down. It does not look dramatic. It does not make a good headline. But it teaches a private lesson. The world can see you and still not open the door. He was not sleeping under a bridge. That was not his story. His was a different kind of pre-fame hunger. The kind where the body is clean, the shirt is pressed, the actor shows up on time, and still no one knows whether he will ever become necessary. There's a kind of poverty in that too. Not the poverty of an empty plate. The poverty of not yet being chosen. He took the work available. A face in an ad. A small role in episodic television. A presence a camera liked, but had not yet learned how to use. He was tall, handsome, disciplined, and still uncertain. Hollywood is full of men like that. Men who look as if the door should open, standing for years in hallways where nothing happens. During those years, something else shaped him, something that does not photograph the way red carpets do. From 1967 to 1973, Tom Selleck served in the California Army National Guard. He was a young man during the Vietnam era. That detail cannot be separated from the rest of his life. The draft was not an idea floating somewhere in politics. It was a fact young men carried close to the skin. He served. He did not make a legend out of it. He did not later turn it into a permanent talking point. He simply carried it inward, the way men of his formation often carried serious things. Not as speeches, as posture, as restraint, as a kind of silence that would later read on camera as strength. In 1971, before the world knew what to do with him, he married Jacqueline Ray. She was an actress. She understood waiting. She understood the strange life of people who work in an industry where one phone call can change everything and no phone call can say just as much. She knew him before Magnum P.I, before the posters, before the magazine covers. before strangers had opinions about his face. It is one thing to love a famous man. It is another thing to love a man while he is still trying to become one. Jacqueline's son, Kevin, also became part of Tom's life. A household formed around a career that had not yet broken open. There were auditions, small jobs, hopes carefully rationed. The ordinary life before fame arrived and began rearranging everything. Then came the near misses. James Bond came close enough to leave a mark. The role was there. The producers were interested. The possibility was real. Then it was gone. Another man stepped into the tuxedo. Tom Selleck went back to work. Later came Indiana Jones. Steven Spielberg wanted him. George Lucas wanted him. By every external measure, it was the kind of role that can alter not just a career, but film history. The fedora, the whip, the adventure hero of a generation. But Selleck was tied to Magnum P.I. The contract held. He could not take the part. Harrison Ford became Indiana Jones. Tom Selleck returned to Hawaii. People often tell that story as if it were only a tragedy of missed opportunity. It is sharper than that, because Tom Selleck did not simply lose a role. He kept a promise. He honored the work already in front of him when another future looked brighter. That is not always the choice Hollywood rewards. Hollywood likes hunger. It likes ambition. It likes people who will break one door to reach another. Tom Selleck had a different code. A commitment meant something. A contract meant something. The work in front of him meant something. That code cost him. It would not be the last time. In 1980, Magnum P.I. arrived. CBS had a show set in Hawaii. A private investigator named Thomas Sullivan Magnum, a Vietnam veteran living on a wealthy author's estate, driving a red Ferrari, solving crimes with a mix of charm, warmth, humor, and male ease that television had not quite seen before. Tom Selleck said yes. Of course he said yes. The show premiered in December 1980. Within a single season, he became unavoidable. The mustache became iconic. The red Ferrari became iconic. The laugh became iconic. Magnum became one of the most beloved characters on American television. And Thomas William Selleck, the man who had waited through years of small roles and uncertain calls, became public property almost overnight. Fame is often described as arrival. For Tom Selleck, it was also invasion. It entered the house. It changed the air. It turned a private man into a public image. It took the uncertain actor Jacqueline had known and replaced him in the eyes of the world with something larger, brighter, harder to hold. The marriage did not survive the first years of that kind of attention. Tom and Jacqueline divorced in 1982. He later described the divorce as the worst thing that ever happened to him. That sentence deserves to be heard slowly. The worst thing, not the basketball dream, that ended with 4 points. Not James Bond. Not Indiana Jones. Not years of waiting. Not professional disappointments. Not later cancellations. Not the physical where that came with decades of work. The worst thing was the end of marriage. That tells you what Tom Selleck valued before Hollywood had time to misunderstand him. The thing was never only fame. The thing was the private life, the connection, the daily belonging to someone who knew him before the world turned him into an icon. When that broke, fame could not repair it. Ratings could not repair it. Magazine covers could not repair it. The Ferrari could not repair it. And something else changed too. His relationship with Kevin, the boy he had helped raise, did not remain what it had been. Divorce reorganizes a house. It changes rooms, routines, loyalties, and the simple map of who belongs where. That loss did not make the same public noise. It did not photograph like a divorce headline. But private losses rarely do. They settle quietly. They widen slowly. Then one day the distance is permanent. The divorce did not just end a marriage. It changed his understanding of fame. Before Magnum, success must have looked like rescue. After Magnum, success looked more complicated. It had brought money, recognition, and a role that would follow him for the rest of his life. But it had also entered the most private room in his life and left something broken there. That is the kind of lesson a man does not forget. He may not talk about it often. He may not turn it into a public wound, but it stays under later choices. It helps explain why the next marriage was guarded, why the ranch mattered, why privacy became more than preference. It became protection. Most people keep asking what Hollywood took from him. The better question is what he began trying to protect. Because after Magnum P.I., Tom Selleck had already learned what fame could do. It could make a man rich and recognizable. It could also enter the kitchen. It could press on a marriage. It could take a home and turn it into a set of pressures no one else could see. The light had found him. But light at a certain intensity does not only illuminate, it burns. Stay with us, because the most important decision of Tom Selleck's life was not a role he accepted. It was a life he refused to give away. For 8 seasons, Tom Selleck carried Magnum P.I. 162 episodes. The Emmy came. The Golden Globe nominations came. The covers came. The interviews came. The public version of him grew so large that it began to look effortless. But nothing about that life was effortless. A television series is not only acting, it is hours, call times, physical work, publicity, expectation. The strange demand that an actor must remain available not only to the show, but to the version of himself the audience believes it owns. By the time Magnum P.I. ended, Tom Selleck was exhausted. Not bored, not ungrateful, exhausted. Years later, he explained it plainly. He had left the show because he was tired from it. And more than that, because he wanted a 3-dimensional life. That phrase is the key. A 3-dimensional life. Not only the career, not only the face, not only the job. A life with depth, a marriage, a child, land, silence, the right to wake up in the morning and not belong first to strangers. For a man who had become one of the most recognizable people in America, that was not a small request. It was a recovery plan. Fame had made him famous. It had not made him whole. So he began building something Hollywood could not fully enter. In 1987, he married Gilly Mack. She was a British actress and dancer. Their marriage was private from the beginning, guarded in a way that now seems almost impossible in celebrity culture. By then, Tom knew what exposure could do. He had already watched one marriage collapse under the weather of sudden fame. He did not need the second one turned into public entertainment before it had a chance to breathe. The wedding was quiet, protected, nearly hidden. A decision made by 2 people, not staged for strangers. Then, in 1988, their daughter Hannah was born. That same year, Tom Selleck bought the place that would become the center of the rest of his life. A ranch in Hidden Valley, near Thousand Oaks, California. 60 acres. A former Dean Martin property. An 8-bedroom Spanish colonial ranch house. A swimming pool. Stables. 20 acres of avocado trees. From the outside, it might sound like a celebrity purchase. Another famous man buying space, gates, and views. But Tom Selleck did not treat it like a trophy. The ranch became work. Trees needed care. Fences needed fixing. The land needed attention. The days had tasks no network could schedule. The dirt did not care about ratings. The avocado trees did not know who won an Emmy. The horses did not applaud. And that may have been exactly why he needed it. On the ranch, Tom Selleck could return to something ordinary enough to save him. He could be useful without being watched. He could repair something without turning the repair into a scene. He could raise his daughter in a place where the first sounds of the morning were not agents, cameras, or studio calls. Jillie Mack once described the move in a way that explains the entire second half of his life. She said he knew he needed to buy back his anonymity and replenish the soul. Buy back his anonymity. Those words are almost painful because they suggest fame had taken something so basic that even a successful man had to purchase distance in order to feel like a person again. Not just privacy. Anonymity. The chance to be unobserved. The chance to be a husband before being a public figure. The chance to be a father before being an icon. The chance to walk the land and not perform gratitude, strength, charm, or masculinity for anyone. The ranch also gave him something Hollywood never could. Consequence without performance. If a fence needed repair, charm did not fix it. If a tree was failing, fame did not save it. If an animal needed attention, no audience could stand in for the work. There is dignity in that kind of labor. It does not ask whether you are still famous. It asks whether you are willing to do the ordinary thing again. For a man whose face had been turned into a national symbol, ordinary work became a form of privacy. The ranch did not erase Tom Selleck the star. It gave Thomas William Selleck somewhere to exist when the star had become too large. This is where the story becomes sadder than fans realized. Because the ranch was not simply where Tom Selleck went after Hollywood. It was where he went so Hollywood would not get everything. Did not go anywhere, because the ranch was not a retreat. It was the place where Tom Selleck tried to become a whole man again. There was a Kawasaki ATV on the property, painted in a camouflage pattern, large and practical enough for his 6'4" frame. There was a creek. There was a wooden covered bridge. He called it his rehab bridge. After a hip replacement, Tom Selleck threw himself into building that bridge as part of his recovery. Wood, bolts, trusses, physical work, a body forced to relearn what it could do. Think about that image. Not a red carpet, not a Ferrari, not a heroic shot on television. A man after hip replacement, using his hands, his back, his balance, and his patience to build a small bridge on his own land. That is the opposite of Hollywood aging. Hollywood wants aging to be hidden, corrected, softened by lighting or denied. The ranch made it practical. A joint had been replaced. The body had changed. So he built something, a bridge, not as a symbol for an interview, as a task. That is Tom Selleck's language. When something breaks, repair what can be repaired. When the body changes, keep moving. When the world becomes too loud, go back to the land. The hip replacement matters because Tom Selleck's career was always physical. He was never only a face. He was height, shoulders, stride, stillness, the way he filled the doorway, the way he moved through Hawaii in Magnum P.I, the way he sat in a police commissioner's chair on Blue Bloods and made authority look heavy without making it loud. The body was part of the work, and bodies keep their own accounts. Basketball, military service, action scenes, horseback riding, ranch work, decades on sets, long days, repeated movement. The bill does not arrive all at once. It gathers. A knee here, a hip there, a back that does not forgive as quickly. A movement that used to happen without thought, now requiring a pause. Tom Selleck rarely made those costs the center of his public story. That is part of his old code. Private pain remains private. The work gets done. The morning arrives. The fence still needs fixing. The land still asks for something. Hollywood, by contrast, is built on replacement. Another actor, another show, another franchise, another version. The ranch does not replace a man so easily. It asks whether he will come outside again tomorrow. That may be why the place became more than property. It became his argument against being consumed. A man who had lost roles, lost privacy, lost a first marriage, and watched fame enter his life, like whether it found a place where he could still decide what kind of morning he would have. There is comfort in that. There is also loneliness, because land can protect a man, but it can also reveal what he needed protection from. Tom and Jilly raised Hannah there, away from the center of the Hollywood machine. That decision says as much as any interview. Hannah did not become a tabloid child. She did not become a prop in her father's celebrity. She became an equestrian. Horses, training, competition, discipline, a life built around skill and patience rather than red carpets. For a father whose first dream had been athletic, that must have carried a private kind of meaning. Tom's own body had once promised a basketball future. 7 games and 4 points ended that dream. His daughter chose a different physical world, one where control is never total because a horse is not a machine, and excellence depends on rhythm, trust, repetition, and courage. She built her own life. That may have been the point. A famous last name can open doors in Hollywood. It does very little when the animal underneath you decides whether it trusts you. Tom Selleck protected that. He protected the family from becoming an extension of the brand. He protected the household from the appetite that turns private people into public content. He protected his daughter's right to be known for something other than being his daughter. That kind of protection does not look dramatic. It looks like distance. It looks like fewer photographs. It looks like interviews that do not reveal too much. It looks like a father who keeps certain rooms closed. To a gossip culture, that can seem secretive. To a family, it can be mercy. Jilly remained with him. Decades passed. Hollywood marriages collapsed around them, one after another, often loudly, often publicly, often with lawyers and headlines and photographs outside restaurants. Tom and Jilly stayed. Not because staying is simple. Staying is never simple, especially not in a business that turns attention into temptation and absence into habit. But they built a life with enough distance around it to survive. That is not an accident. It is design. A ranch, a daughter, a marriage protected from the machinery, a man famous enough to be watched, choosing again and again to make part of himself unavailable. That may be why Tom Selleck has always seemed slightly out of reach. Even when he is charming, even when he is funny, even when he gives interviews, there is a door behind his eyes that does not open for public. At first, that looks like old-fashioned restraint. Later, it looks like self-preservation. Keep watching, because the saddest part of this story is not that Hollywood moved on. It is that Tom Selleck may have known it always would. The 1990s and 2000s did not erase Tom Selleck. They changed the shape of his career. He worked in films. He appeared on television. He surprised younger audiences as Dr. Richard Burke on Friends, with a charm that aged but had not disappeared. He was no longer only Magnum. He could be older, calmer, funny in a quieter way, romantic without trying to look young. That mattered. Then came Jesse Stone. In 2005, Tom Selleck began playing the police chief from Robert B. Parker's novels. Jesse Stone was not a bright hero. He was not Magnum in a different shirt. He was lonely, controlled, bruised, a man with alcohol problems, grief, and private damage. Selleck fit him because he no longer needed to prove he could fill a scene. He could sit in one. He could let silence do work. He could look like a man who had already lived through things the script did not need to explain. Jesse Stone gave him something the action years rarely did. A chance to play damage without spectacle. A man who keeps doing the job, because stopping would be worse. It is not difficult to understand why he stayed with that character. Then, in 2010, came Blue Bloods. Frank Reagan, New York City Police Commissioner. Patriarch, father, grandfather, a man whose authority came less from force than from stillness. The role fit Tom Selleck so cleanly that it almost felt inevitable. Everything he had learned was there. The restraint, the weight, the moral seriousness, the ability to sit at the head of a table and make silence feel like judgment. The show ran for 14 seasons. 292 episodes. For millions of viewers, the Reagan family dinners became the heart of the show. The table, the prayers, the arguments, the old-fashioned sense that a family could disagree and still belong to one another. Frank Reagan became another American father figure. Not soft, not sentimental, not modern in the obvious way, but steady. And Tom Selleck understood steadiness. He had been practicing it for decades. He understood the cost of family. He understood what fame could do to it. He understood why a dinner table could matter. To some viewers, Blue Bloods was a police drama. To others, it was a weekly visit to a house where someone still believed in duty, loyalty, and the difficult work of staying connected. That is why the show lasted. That is why Frank Reagan mattered. That is why the ending carried weight. In 2024, Blue Bloods ended. 14 seasons is a long life for a television drama. No one can honestly call that short. Still, an ending can hurt even when it makes sense on paper. Tom Selleck had spoken about wanting the show to continue. He believed there was still life in it. He still wanted to work. He had said plainly that he wanted to work as long as they would have him. That sentence does not sound desperate. It sounds like a working man who does not understand why unused capacity should be wasted. He was not trying to be young. He was not trying to chase a trend. He wanted to keep doing the disciplined labor of inhabiting a character. Then the show ended, and the universe continued in another form. Boston Blue moved forward with Donnie Wahlberg. The franchise did not vanish. It shifted. It changed cities. It carried on without Frank Reagan at the center. That is a particular kind of pain. Not failure. Something colder. Continuation without you. Hollywood has many versions of goodbye. The clean goodbye is cancellation. The crueler goodbye is when the world you helped build continues, but your chair is no longer there. After a show like Blue Bloods ends, the silence is not empty all at once. It arrives in small ways. The missing call time, the missing script, the missing drive to a set where everyone knows the rhythm of your day, the missing dinner table that was fictional and still somehow became part of your working life. For 14 seasons, Frank Reagan had somewhere to sit. A chair, a table, a family arranged around him. Then the work stopped, and the universe moved on in another direction. That is not tragedy in the loud sense. It is quieter than that. It is the feeling of a man returned to land that loves him more honestly than the business ever could, while still knowing the business has continued without him. Tom Selleck had seen versions of that before. James Bond continued. Indiana Jones continued. Hollywood continued. Now the Blue Bloods world continued. He could understand the business and still feel the sting. Those two things can live in the same sentence. He could wish people well and still know what it means to be left outside a house that once had your fingerprints on every surface. Frank Reagan's Sunday dinner table had been one of the show's most recognizable images. An old man at the head of a family. The father who stayed. the voice of continuity. Then the industry moved forward. It always does. That is what Tom Selleck seemed to understand before many actors do. Hollywood will love you. Hollywood will use you. Hollywood will remember you. Hollywood will also move on. So build something it cannot cancel. That is what the ranch was. That is what the marriage was. That is what Hannah's life outside the machine was. That is what privacy was. Not withdrawal. Insurance. A man who gives everything to Hollywood may be left with applause and very little else when the applause changes direction. Tom Selleck did not give everything. He gave the work. He kept the rest. At 81, that decision looks less like distance and more like wisdom. Still, wisdom does not remove sadness. It only gives sadness somewhere to sit. Imagine the morning after a long-running show ends. No call time. No script waiting with the same weight. No Frank Reagan suit. No familia satembra. No table where a fictional family gathers. No crew that has become part of the rhythm of your life. A man can have a ranch, a wife, a daughter, and a long legacy, and still feel the silence left by work that has ended. People misunderstand that. They think if a person is rich, old sadness does not count. They think if a career was successful, endings should be easy. They think if a man has land, family, and money, he cannot feel the shape of what has been lost. But loss does not disappear because the house is large. Silence does not become less quiet because the property has 60 acres. A man can stand on beautiful land and still know that a chapter is closed. The land gives him a place to stand. It does not pretend nothing ended. That is why Tom Selleck's life away from Hollywood carries a strange emotional weight. The ranch is peaceful, but peace is not the same as joy. Sometimes peace is what remains after a man has spent decades defending himself from noise. Sometimes peace is earned at the price of distance. And distance, even when chosen wisely, can become lonely. Stay with us until the end, because once you understand what he was protecting, his quiet life looks very different. At 81, Tom Selleck is not a forgotten man. That would be false. He is not a tragic recluse. That would be too simple. He is an American television icon who built a long career, a long marriage, and a life with real boundaries. But the sadness in his story is quieter than the sadness people usually click on. It is not scandal. It is not ruin. It is not a collapse in a hospital room. It is the sadness of a man who understood, perhaps earlier than most, that fame would always ask for more than it deserved. More time, more access, more family, more body, more self. And so he spent his life drawing lines. The first line was around the marriage he wanted to protect after losing the first one. The second line was around his daughter. The third was around the ranch. The fourth was around his own silence. He did not explain everything. He did not turn every wound into a headline. He did not let the audience have every room. For a public figure, that is almost an act of rebellion. Hollywood runs on access. Tom Selleck built a life around refusal. A polite refusal. A dignified refusal. But refusal all the same. No, you cannot have all of my marriage. No, you cannot have all of my daughter. No, you cannot have all of my land. No, you cannot have all of my pain. No, you cannot have the whole man. That may be what Hollywood never understood. It kept measuring him by what it could see. The roles, the ratings, the mustache, the Ferrari, the police commissioner, the missed franchises, the long-running shows. But Tom Selleck's real life may have been organized around what could not be seen. The quiet after the divorce, the distance from Kevin, the decision to keep Jilly out of the machine, the choice to raise Hannah near horses instead of paparazzi, the dusty ATV crossing the property, the bridge built after hip surgery, the morning work on land that did not know or care what CBS had decided. Those are not the usual markers of celebrity success. They are better than that. They are the markers of a man trying to remain intact. And maybe that is why he has lasted. Not because nothing touched him. Plenty touched him. The basketball dream closed. The first marriage ended. The stepson bond changed. James Bond went elsewhere. Indiana Jones went elsewhere. Magnum P.I. gave him fame and took his quiet. The body required repair. Blue Bloods ended. The franchise continued without Frank Reagan at the center. The list is long, but the private life remained. That is the part people miss. He did not escape loss. He built around it. The ranch, the marriage, the daughter, the work he still wanted to do, the silence he refused to surrender. And maybe that is what 81 looks like when a man has lived long enough to know what the world can take. Not the absence of damage, the presence of something that outlasted damage. A wife who stayed, a daughter who built her own discipline, a piece of land that gave him back ordinary mornings, a body that changed but kept moving, a career that ended chapters without erasing the man inside them. Hollywood kept asking what Tom Selleck lost. But perhaps the more honest question is what he saved. He saved a marriage from becoming a public exhibition. He saved a daughter from being raised as a celebrity accessory. He saved land that gave him a kind of anonymity money usually cannot buy back. He saved enough of himself to keep working without letting work own him completely. He saved the part of himself that scored 4 points in 7 games, set the basketball down, and learned to move forward without turning disappointment into identity. That is a through line, not perfect success, not uninterrupted triumph. A man placing one life down and picking up the next. Basketball ended. Acting began. Magnum ended. The ranch began. A marriage failed. Another marriage was protected. A show ended. The land remained. A body wore down. A bridge was built. That is Tom Selleck's story when you stop looking only at the screen. It is a story about protection. What do you think Tom Selleck was really protecting all these years? His family? His privacy? His dignity? Or the part of himself Hollywood never owned? Leave your answer in the comments. Because the people who spend their lives protecting something private deserve to be witnessed, not just admired. And if Tom Selleck's quiet endurance means something to you, leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it tells us these stories are worth telling. Before you go, tell us what city you are watching from. There is something powerful about knowing that people from different places are sitting with the same story tonight, remembering a man who gave America strength by quietly protecting his own. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.